Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Wow, that was random. Exceptional Radio.
Good afternoon. It's the 13th of September. The West Coast is on fire, and it looks like a dystopian... Actually, it reminds me of the filters that Hollywood likes to put on, like, Central America or India or the Middle East whenever they want to make it look like a hellhole. Except there are, police lights and helicopters that aren't shooting at people on the ground as much. And it looks like there are, there are some casualties, which is unfortunate. But, it's like a hell blaze. And some of it started because, fucking gender reveal parties.
Yeah, it seems like I think there's 24 fatalities so far, and then is he the governor of Oregon or the mayor of Portland was saying they were trying to prep for a mass casualty event. And again, it's like there are a lot of things that have been deconstructed that were in place to prevent this exact type of scenario from happening. But it's weird to continuously see Americans unable to fathom reacting to a natural occurrence when it happens every year, because they don't seem to understand how planning ahead works. So then you have this constant back and forth between a population that claims to be preparing for economic sustainability when they can't put in place the things that are needed from year to year when we have hurricane season, wildfire season, tornado season, blizzard season. There's all these things that happen every year around the country that the states are then expected to prepare for individually, but then the entire country kind of has to deal with the fallout in that anytime there's a hurricane, people have to move or they have to relocate during the hurricane. Anytime there's a wildfire, people have to relocate during those. So it's not as if the people in the local areas are going to be the only ones affected by these things, because then those people have to uproot and move to different cities or states for a period of time. So
at least 1 million acres of U.S. territory has burned in wildfires since 1980, on average, at least, and going up, surpassing 10 million acres a couple times in 2015 and 2017. Wow, this is a really hard chart to read. And it looks like 90% of them are caused by humans. 90%. I mean,
think of all the wildlife that perishes. Has perished.
Oh man, that's just like heart-wrenching.
because of human intervention and sheer stupidity and inability to plan ahead and fundamentally accept the consequences of their actions. This wildfire has not only claimed animal life, plant life, also human life, and those previous wildfires have also claimed animal life, plant life, and human life. And there are long-term ramifications from somebody becoming displaced from their home. They have to find another home. What if they're not able to afford it? What does that mean? That because of somebody's desire to put on some poorly conceived, status-inspiring show for their friends that really could just be orchestrated via email, that somebody loses their home or somebody loses their life or they lose their grandparents, or this is the same kind of inability to think critically that leads to people spreading disease across the United States because they don't want to wear masks, or because they think that going out to a bar in a place that has eased its restrictions for public contact, contrary to scientific advisement, is a good idea and gives them some sort of a leg up on their neighbor, and they don't care if they get sick. So, what does this mean? That if somebody decides to reveal the gender of their child in a very dangerous way in nature, they just don't care what the ramifications are, and it was more important for them to basically do something that could have been shared far more creatively through a different medium and more safely through a different medium. I mean, why get all those people together in the first place, regardless of whether or not it was outdoors? On top of that, it's very frustrating. It's frustrating also because, Chris, what you said brings to mind the inability of a community that's vulnerable to natural disasters to advocate for itself effectively and take advantage of any resources or any kind of planning or any kind of funding or devices, either man-made or natural, to protect themselves and to mitigate the risks of living in high-risk areas. If a community was able or enabled by local government, by state government, by federal government to really take advantage of or just be able to integrate into its environment in a harmonized way, then there would probably be less carnage. There would be less chaos. There would be less tragedy. And there would also probably be more continuity in the lives of the people in those communities. And there would probably be more interstate cooperation that is readily visible and available and broadly advertised, basically saying, okay, well, we know that there's going to be massive flooding in this part of the United States in this time of year, or we project it over these next couple of years. Why don't we work together between our states and with our federal government in order to create a path of migration or temporary migration, and then we can ensure that people are educated, or that schooling is uninterrupted because there's already a place to receive these displaced people. And then if there were functioning systems like that existed, then I think that could also address homelessness, because the models would then exist for how to place displaced people who don't necessarily have all the resources of the upper echelons of class. And I think the reason why a system like that doesn't exist is because its very existence would fundamentally challenge the caste system that exists in the country in terms of being able to access resources equitably and be able to live a fulfilling life where people aren't constantly on edge and think that they're in danger of losing their lives and their jobs on a daily basis because of a poor performance review, or because of cutbacks, or because of even a pandemic. I mean, if we were really prepared, if this country was really prepared and really cared for its people, then there would have already been a system in place, well established, to catch safely the people who fall off because of the pandemic. And there wouldn't necessarily be, and to dismantle that system within a single term of executive leadership would cause a massive response from the general public, because if people were already accustomed and attuned to being taken care of properly and equitably, and to see that they don't have to worry about putting food on the table or living in a constant state of anxiety and depression and pressure, then these things wouldn't have nearly as much of an effect. And one of the statistical variables, or one of the variables in regards to mitigating risks, is human error. One of the root cause, if somebody's performing a root cause analysis in the failure of a system or a deviation from an operating procedure, because this is obviously a system that I'm talking about that would be regulated in some way. So there would be procedures in place that people would operate by, and policies and guidelines that would instruct people on how to try and affect the level of stability that they're looking for in the end game. But people consider human error, they consider functional equipment, they consider weather, nature, things like that. And these are all factors that can be considered and analyzed in the long term or longitudinally. If we really want to affect change in the future, we look to our past. As Tien said, there have been millions and millions of acres of forest damage or of wildlife that's been affected. Millions of lives, thousands of lives affected by human lives, animal lives that have been affected by these events. And we should be able to look at that data and come up with a solution. And we should be able to do that.
Well, there were 12 firefighters who were killed recently fighting a fire in Northern California, and they thought it was under control. And I don't think people realize how quickly these things move. Like, there's so much land mass, and these forests are exceptionally dense, and it's just hard to fathom how big these fires actually get. Recently, Chris shared with us an image of a Chinook helicopter that was originally purchased by the state of Oregon to fight fires, but for some reason was serving time in Afghanistan. And I say serving time because it might be a military grade piece of machinery, but it also makes me wonder, like, did the military run out of helicopter budget or something? Because I'm pretty sure that if a state buys something to fight fires, that's what they need it for. And since 1980, at least 1 million acres. So there's been a minimum of 40 million acres of land lost. So the other day, in Washington State, there was a train bridge that was completely on fire, like an old school wooden train bridge. And in my mind, it's like, I wonder what kind of local economies are going to be impacted from that. If that's like a conduit of commerce, or a mechanism to enable commerce on some level, what kind of economies are going to be impacted by just the loss of a train route? And I know that we've got trucking and all that stuff, but I don't think people realize how much a train actually moves in relation, or versus how many trucks you need to move that same volume of whatever you're moving. I just think that there's a gross misunderstanding of the size of things.
Yeah, there's definitely a misunderstanding of the size of things, in that one of the things that is a common understanding of how fire works is that a fire that's not controlled can double in growth every minute. There's all these things about how fire expands that is not really in line with how we think. So when you're thinking about a fire is temporary. It's not a permanent state. But in that impermanent state, it is constantly growing until it exhausts all of its resources. So when you have something, there's the uncontrolled growth, and then there's the heat intensity that can then cause what's known as a flashpoint, where everything ignites at once. And this is like, or a flashover, sorry, because the flashpoint's when something sparks. But there are things about how fire works where when we're thinking about forest fires, a lot of the layperson's response would probably be like, well, why don't they just dump a bunch of water on it or build a moat or something? There's a lot of simplistic approaches that the average human mind would want to take in terms of how to respond to these types of fires. But because they don't behave in the way that our brain rationalizes, none of that stuff really works the way we would expect. And because these things are so large, our brains can't then fathom how much water it would take to actually put out this type of fire. Or, when we're talking about putting out one of these wild forest fires, it would be effectively the equivalent of rerouting the Mississippi River or something for hours to try to actually get the temperature down and also douse enough active flame material that you can actually put out the fire. So again, there's the way that fire actually works in the real world is so it's not uncontrollable, but that word comes close to describing how it actually behaves in the real world. So then that's where the firefighters we have are basically they're using pea shooters to take down a giant, and I can't think of a proper way to it would be the equivalent of trying to gather the ocean with a bucket.
My understanding of these giant wilderness fire containment efforts is that it's mostly containment. They try to minimize the spread, and they drop water or chemicals, mostly chemicals, in areas where it's spreading faster than they can contain it. But really, they're just trying to keep it from spreading out so that whatever combustible material is present will consume itself.
Exactly.
And so once it runs out of fuel, that's it. But the problem is there are only so many people who are willing to walk into that blazing inferno and try and cut down trees or dig trenches or saturate an area of land with water to the point that it won't spread as quickly and it can be, I can't show air quotes right now, but contained.
Because then, people would be like, well, why don't you just put up a wall of concrete around it? And it's like, well, concrete doesn't burn regularly, but once the fire gets to a certain heat level, then the concrete would just burn just the same. And that's kind of like, it has to be thousands of degrees, but when we're talking about an uncontrolled wildfire, that's possible. And that's kind of where the reason it's not an easy fix is because fire does, crazy things when it gets uncontrolled, and it doesn't behave like it does in a controlled setting.
Yeah. There are entire towns in Oregon and Washington that are just have vanished overnight. And the only sign that they were once a town even is there might be a paved road that is relatively intact, or there might be a few pieces of stone that didn't, just crush or crumble underneath the stress of the heat. And, significant portions of small towns that do remain just look like something took a big scoop out of them. It's terrifying. The imagery that's coming out of the West Coast right now is probably as horrifying as I can remember. And I mean, I remember driving through Colorado almost a decade ago when there was giant clouds of smoke, and then the next year flying over Colorado and seeing giant plumes of smoke. It's kind of, our collective memory is so poor that we like Daniel said, that we don't have any systems to help mitigate the impact of these things because people forget that they happen, even though we have evidence that they've been happening for the last 40 years.
What's interesting and also important to note, and what the general public in regards to their perception and response to wildfires don't seem to grasp, is that even if there was no human interaction or intervention in those environments, wildfires can occur naturally. There can be lightning strikes, natural detritus can start to smolder. So these are naturally occurring events. They can be considered just as natural as storms, as floods, essentially, to the level of becoming natural disasters that have an origin that's outside of the realm of human intervention. So to also not do anything not do anything in a matter that integrates with the environment, but also can mitigate the risk of the naturally occurring wildfire, I think is also irresponsible.
Yeah, and I think that's where those wildfires, it's not that they are intentionally meant to serve a purpose, but in their part in the cycle, they replenish the nutrients in the earth by burning all of the topsoil and the trees and all the things that are on it, to then put nutrients back in the earth so that other things can grow. So this is part of a life cycle that over time helps. But when we are trying to have cities and permanent abodes, that doesn't jive with that lifestyle.
And did it ever? Really? I mean, the history of human intervention and growth and settlement and I from an anthropological standpoint, I don't have the data or the numbers in front of me, but from an industrial standpoint, once humans started putting down permanent roots in places that were constantly shifting underneath their feet, either from natural occurrences like hurricanes or extreme cold during certain parts of the year, or wildfires, then that began to become a focal point for tragedy, I think. And tragedy ended up being like commodified essentially by the media. Look at this horrible thing that's happening here, but we want to live here anyway. So people are going to come back and not do anything to try and mitigate the effects of what occurred here, or there's no other place for these people to live, or they can't afford to live anywhere else. So they're forced to live in areas that have risky environmental occurrences in them. And that's also an issue, because what if people were all able to live in the places that environmentally were safer? I mean, let's put pollution aside for a moment, and the detriments of high population density aside for a moment, and the industrialization aspects aside, and let's just say everybody was able to afford to live in the city or in the suburbs where there weren't these naturally occurring events popping up at key points in the year, or as a result of environmental changes or climate change on a global level, then I don't think the human aspect of the tragedy would be there nearly as much. And then also perhaps the risks of human stupidity and error in regard. So like, what if there was nobody living in these areas where the fire was spreading? You'd have the loss of animal life, you'd have the loss of plant life, but then there wouldn't be the human aspect. And then it also brings up the question, would people or would humans be doing nearly as much to try and stop the fire from spreading, and as opposed to just trying to contain it within a larger radius, as opposed to what they're trying to do now, because there are so many essentially human populations within the path of the growing wildfire.
So in 2011, a research group from Kansas State University was working to verify satellite imagery from NASA about prairie fires. And it turns out that prairie fires are, it's necessary to maintain the fertility of the soil in Kansas, or the breadbasket of the country, that kind of stuff. And it turns out that when they suppress wildfires, over time, forests start to emerge. And this actually creates a wildfire hazard, which is kind of amusing to me, because we like trees. Trees improve the oxygen, or the quality of the air. They look pretty. They provide a lot of joy in a lot of ways. But what happens is, over time, and it takes roughly 20 years, and the fires happen regularly. It takes about 20 years, but over time, the prairies, these giant grass patches, they stop returning with grass. They start turning to trees and shrubs and bushes. And this invites a whole different type of wildlife. And, it's nice, but it also presents a fire risk. So there's got to be some kind of balance to this. Oh, and also, areas where trees grow in, the grass never comes back. Like, never. But a lot of these grasslands, these are necessary. But prairie fires, unlike a wilderness fire, have a much higher, or a much greater range of control methods, especially in farmland, where they can take their big ass tractors and dig or turn the earth in places that prevent the fire from spreading, because it's not going to set the dirt on fire, because the grass just doesn't burn that hot. It burns quick, but they can control that. But we don't have that kind of mechanism in absolute wilderness of Oregon or Northern California or Washington. I think there are a lot of challenges to this.
Yeah, and I think part of it is knowing when you're impeding the natural cycle, and when you're actually doing something that's gonna help in the long term.
Yeah. Well, in this case, if they'd have just not set off their incendiary device, they could have prevented a gigantic fire from starting. But that should be against the law. You shouldn't be allowed to set off an incendiary device in a forest. That should absolutely be a punishable crime. Not just jail time, but immense fines. Because that leads to the destruction of public property. It destroys the atmosphere. It ruins entire economies. I mean, that should be a really serious offense.
Yeah, for sure. But then it's like, what is that person's capacity to actually pay the fine? Because I think they're talking about right now in the ranges of 200,000 for the people that started this fire, which obviously is not even remotely close to the damage.
5 years in prison and $250,000 in fines.
Yeah, because then that's not enough.
No.
Are those people going to even be able to pay that? And then it's like, well, what's the fine mean if they can't pay it?
Oh
It's
yeah.
basically an empty gesture at that point.
I mean, what do people get for arson?
I mean, they'll definitely get some sort of criminal.
Arson is punishable by 10 to 30 years in prison, fines up to only $10,000. Level 3 arson is 3 to 16 years in prison, $10,000. Level 4 is 2 to 12. I guess, well, that's just in Indiana.
Yeah, because I don't.
Arson has to be intentional, right?
Yeah, arson has.
So they have to prove motive and all that.
I think if you're setting off an incendiary device, that's intentional.
But the legal the legal perspective is that did they intend to criminally set a fire in order to destroy property? And I don't think that's I think it could be argued pretty powerfully in the opposite in this situation, because
they definitely,
it's a gender reveal ceremony. That's not arson, right?
they definitely won't get charged with arson because they have enough proof that they were not intending to start a forest fire.
Yeah.
So it's like, and this is the difference between manslaughter and murder, in that, you know, if you do something like if you punch someone and they die and you weren't intending to kill them, that's manslaughter versus homicide, where if you are intending to kill them, you are actually committing homicide. And that's kind of where, in the sense that they were trying to ignite something, they were not actually trying to start a forest fire. So that is very unlikely that they'll get charged with arson, but they probably will get charged with some sort of criminal negligence.
I mean, I'm wondering if there was like a no burn order in effect for that area or not. Like, I'm not trying to look for reasons or ways to punish them. I'm just trying to think myself through this whole thing, because it's so unfathomably huge.
Well, because even I think the dude that threw out a cigarette and had one, I think he even got criminal charges. But it's like, it's not arson.
Yeah. I'm moving on from arson at this point. I'm just saying, like, with arson, there are some pretty serious penalties. Like, you know, a decade in prison to 2 decades in prison is a pretty serious punishment. And that's a lifetime for a lot of people.
Yeah, and that's kind of where it's like the level of damage is still going to potentially have criminal repercussions, especially with people dying. It's not like they might end up getting charged with manslaughter or something, that, like, by proxy. That it just depends on the local.
How much blood they, or how many pounds of flesh they want in return.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Because now it's probably, you know, it's probably going to be federal, since it's multiple states.
Yeah. So
I mean, by and local.
Yeah. So to change gears a little bit, in the past couple of months, there have been a lot of concern because SoftBank wants to sell their ARM holdings, and it looks like NVIDIA is going to purchase ARM to the tune of like $40 million or $1 billion. And I think this is really kind of incredible, because NVIDIA had already tried to create their own system on a chip platform, the Tegra platform, and it was, you know, kind of adopted, but not really. It was always like a second fiddle. But it looks like now NVIDIA is going to be taking control of one of the most valuable pieces of intellectual property that exists, because you know, I'm not sure how many people realize this, but almost every mobile device on the planet at this point has some ARM architecture-based, you know, central processing unit. There are ARM system on chip processors in refrigerators and microwaves and ovens. There are systems on chip in people's door locks and their smart home controllers, web cameras. NVIDIA is going to be, you know, sitting at the top of the heap here in a little while. For the past couple of years, I think Apple's even tried to move away from NVIDIA GPUs, and in favor. They've been using AMD GPUs because AMD was able to meet their supply numbers. But now it looks like Apple's moving to their own silicon, Apple Silicon, which is built on ARM architecture, and that means Apple Silicon is going to be provided by NVIDIA in some weird way. Intel's own system on a chip has failed to get any market share. And I'm pretty sure they scrapped it, or maybe they sold it. I mean, what happens next? Everything is going to be powered by NVIDIA. Is this even a bad thing?
I mean, I think this is where Sony is really the only competition to NVIDIA at this point.
Yeah. And they're not really known as a chip manufacturer.
Right, and they're not even really competing. So
yeah.
Because I mean, yeah, they're not really chip manufacturers, but they produce technology that makes processing more efficient and effective. So they're not direct chip competitors, but in that the outcome is to have processing and graphics processing. They are competing for the platform of what things are going to be displayed on it somewhat. And even then, it's not even really direct competition so much as Sony's trying to get, devices in homes, and they're also trying to make as much money on it as possible. So they build as much of the devices they possibly can.
Yeah. Well, we've had like 64-bit processors for a long time, but ARM has just, recently they unveiled its Cortex R82, and it's a 64-bit real-time processor aimed at handling large volumes of data. So before this, everyone was pretty much using a 32-bit memory handling system, coprocessor. And so there was like a 4 gigabyte limitation on like your passing data on like a hard drive or an SSD. And now we're going to have SSDs like and hard drives or just storage devices that can handle so much more than that it's not even going to be an issue anymore. And this is part of that intellectual property. I think we're about to see an explosion in GPU technology. I think we're on the verge of seeing like VR actually become the thing that we've been told it was going to be, and the same with AR. I think a lot of these things are about to just have like just exponential growth because NVIDIA is already doing just incredible things in the GPU space right now. I think having access to all of this new technology is really going to benefit them and of course everyone else because we're buying their cards. We're going to benefit from the new technology too.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where all of these discoveries and innovations are sort of feeding into each other for a general trajectory that is bringing us more realistic experiences, whether visual or like audio, giving us multidimensional perspective. The more our processors are able to represent space-time more accurately, the more we're getting these entertainment experiences that are becoming less and less distinguishable from real life.
Yeah. I remember Turok, the hunter, what is it? Turok? Something Dinosaur Hunter?
That game was dope.
Turok, Dinosaur Hunter. Okay, so that game it was like a Nintendo 64, I think. That game was really fun, and it was the first game that I actually noticed proximity-based triggers for audio. So, like, if you got too close to a certain like tree, it would change the music in the background a little bit because there might be something over there. It was the first time that I noticed it, and because before, like with Doom, or I guess Doom and Duke Nukem, like you get close to a new room and then the music changes. But with Turok, because it was so expansive, it seemed like certain different areas of a room had their own music and their own sound files that they would cycle through. And I think what this is going to really get us to, and what I think Chris was hinting at, is that at a point, this kind of technology, this ability to move information, is going to allow for a much more realistic experience within an environment. And I mean, more than just a virtual environment, even just a traditional like 2D playing on a screen gaming system experience is going to improve. I'm actually kind of excited because I feel like NVIDIA has been really dedicated to a wide range of visualization technology for as long as I can remember. And I mean, not just games, but they were developing their Tesla engine to help geological modeling for a long time.
So, what you're talking about is a direct result of audio software development. There was a program called FMOD
Yeah.
that was created in 1995. I remember working in that early on. But it also, basically what it did was it allowed for objects to be created in virtual space that also had dockets or buckets for audio pieces to be deposited in. So then you could like create a three-dimensional map that had audio triggers on it. So if it hadn't been for FMOD, that whole Turok experience wouldn't even be possible. So this is kind of where you have these elements of like experiences need multiple parts to make them authentic and have them reproduce what they're actually trying to mimic.
Yeah.
And in that, before FMOD or that type of audio software engine existed, the game audio experience was very, very linear and terrible in that you didn't really have this chance for your interaction with the world to be much of a trigger. And in that, you get much more control over your experience as a gamer when the developers are able to create these much more responsive and reactive environments.
When I think of responsive and reactive environments, I'm not as extensively into gaming as some people. However, I've had time playing Elder Scrolls Skyrim, and that has a lot of, at least for when it was released, I think it had a pretty impressive proximity-based audio response, at least from the characters or the NPCs to the locations, and how the soundtrack would change within a combat scenario, and then being able to hear distance growing or shortening between characters and things like that. It's a lot of fun playing in that kind of environment. But at the same time, things like coming across a pack of wolves in the game, only upon getting close enough to the wolves did they start to attack you. And I think that's a phenomenon that occurs in a lot of games, where if you stay out of range of something, then it won't bother you, but you might be able to see it or hear it. But then if you get close enough to it, it might respond to you as an enemy.
Yeah, even then, there's elements about how the audio objects were placed in games, so that initially, if you were triggering an object, it would be based on proximity, and then that object would just have a sound that played. Whereas then, once the engines got better, you could start directing the actual vector of the sound, so that if someone walks outside of the sound cone, then it starts to drop off as if it's mimicking real life. And if you're in a room with somebody and you start to walk away, the voice is going to get softer. So then these things had to be reproduced in games so that the space started to be more realistic. And then, if you were not facing someone, you're not going to hear the same audio quality as if you were facing them. There's going to be some sort of distortion or noise added or something. Or they're going to pan it so that it's louder on one side than the other. Or, again, all these things about the subtle aspects of creating an environment that are going to be necessary to make it more real, understanding that it takes a lot of processing power for all these things to happen in tandem.
Well, that's when I think about, and you talk about processing power, I think about the consoles, the evolution of the console. It's essentially like a processor meant for specific types of programs and specific types of graphics. And then the rest is kind of cosmetic, it seems. Like the latest version is meant to be able to run some kind of graphics engine or has a more advanced video card or equivalent for a console. And then in order to keep up with the power required for that, then it has a different kind of power source, or it has a different kind of, or a more advanced processing unit. And I guess that's what people are looking for. They're not just looking for, gameplay anymore. It seems like they're looking for quality of construction.
So my 10-year-old computer has better specs. Well, it's not all 10 years old. My video card is only 3 years old. My old ass computer is more powerful than an Xbox 360, which was released in 2005. And so it took like 5 years for me to get a processor that could outperform it, but I'm pretty certain that processor would have been available then. And the GPU they had was only superior to then generation GPUs because it was designed with a very specific purpose in mind. It wasn't designed to be as comprehensive a video controller as what we have now. And I'm pretty sure that Chris's computer has a GPU. His whole computer is more powerful than the next generation Xbox that's not even released. So
yeah, it's definitely. And then
I think that at a point, if somebody really wants that level of gaming experience, the console is never going to compete because it's the lowest common denominator device. And if you want something that can do, truly quantum accurate VR experiences, you've got to go beyond that and build a real computer.
Yeah, and the craziest thing is the way that these consoles are being presented is as if they are the media or lay people are presenting them as if consoles are the pinnacle of gaming because they are designed specifically for gaming. But in reality, that's not even remotely true, in that because they are mass produced and the companies making them need to have something that's accessible but also powerful enough to then justify putting down money on it. The demographic that they're going for is not educated enough to know what they're buying. So when they're only seeing the games, they're only seeing the output. When you have the difference between PlayStation 4 games and PlayStation 5 games looking good enough visually to justify a new system in the gamer's head, then they are going to rationalize paying money to buy an underpowered machine because they don't actually know their machine is underpowered, and all they care about is the gaming, what they believe to be top level experience. But then this gets back to, because individuals who build their gaming computers are not all following the same formula, the same schematics, or the same even using the same parts, then there's no real consolidated front against gaming consoles about why the gaming console is kind of, it's defunct effectively. And in that, when we look at the way arcades worked, arcade games were at the time very powerful machines designed for one specific purpose, in that it's usually one specific, very specific game, and there's a whole entire machine dedicated to that. Right now, that's where the gaming consoles are, because on some of them, yeah, you can go surf the internet, but even then you're going to have a limited browser experience, because the gaming company that sold the console doesn't want your browser to then crash your gaming computer, because their gaming computer isn't, or the console isn't powerful enough to handle a lot of the stuff that's happening on the internet. So then there's this weird gap where current people who are gamers that buy consoles are then identified as hardcore gamers, and there's this whole element of trying to articulate between casual gamers and hardcore gamers. So then the hardcore gamers become identified as the carriers of the cultural I want to say they believe themselves to carry the cultural base, or what the culture is supposed to be, but then it becomes this weird Xbox versus PlayStation infighting war because of the way the consoles are presented, that then you don't even get a united front on the consoles. Yeah. So it's weird that gaming has become this tribal power struggle over who decides the culture, when in reality it's always the companies that are deciding the culture, but the consumers have this false sense of influence, because they're then, like I said, a lot of them are not really smart enough to know what's happening under the hood of their gaming console, let alone in the boardrooms of the companies that are putting out these gaming consoles. Because I don't know if anybody remembers when the original Xbox came out, Microsoft took a big loss on that.
Because they would only support 720p.
I mean, they were selling them at a monetary loss.
Oh yeah, that too.
The system cost like $400 to make, and they were selling it for $300. And nobody could understand why Microsoft was trying to get a foothold in the console market when they were doing it at a loss. And it was because they saw the cultural influence that gaming consoles have. So then, you know, however many generations into the Xbox now, Microsoft has dedicated Microsoft fanboys because they have consoles.
Yeah.
They have people who, I'm sure there's people who have fucking Xbox tattoos on their bodies out there roaming in the world.
There are people with Red Bull tattoos. There are definitely Xbox tattoos. Even my 3-year-old 1050 card will play Grand Theft Auto Online and Grand Theft Auto 5, and it looks better than the samples that I viewed from Xbox One or PlayStation 4. Like, I've got a 4K monitor. I turned everything all the way up. It doesn't slow down. My computer did not cost that much. When I think about how much it actually cost, like just to get the 10-year-old motherboard and 10-year-old processor and 3-year-old video card and the RAM, and a 128 gigabyte SSD, a fucking fast one, is only $15. So for $30 you can have a RAID SSD configuration and have lightning fast data transfer rates for gaming. And then GPUs are actually probably as affordable as they've ever been. Granted, there's also a broader range of technology from entry level to holy shit god level video cards, but I think that somebody who's just getting into gaming, if they're comparing it to a console, doesn't actually need that video card. I'm not sure if they're even going to notice the differences.
No, they're not. And, one of the issues is that because of the way that the console markets work, the game developers never actually end up using all of the power in these consoles in the first place. So the Xbox Ones and the PS4s, they're moving on to the PS5 before the developers have actually been able to make use of all the power in those machines.
Well, I think Dead Space is the only game that I can think of where the developers had to work directly with Microsoft on the developer consoles to make sure that they were extracting every last bit of juice from the console that was there, because they were trying to do a lot of the proximity-based audio queuing and environmental effects queuing. And they were trying to take advantage of every bit of it. And they wanted to use as high a resolution audio samples as possible. They wanted to have everything as clean and smooth. They came up with new animations for variations of interaction so that nobody was going to have the same game twice. But that's only one gaming franchise that has done that I'm aware of. I'm sure that there are others, but I could be wrong.
Yeah, because even then,
It's only one franchise. Halo doesn't even do that, and that's like the premier Xbox franchise.
the thing about it is when you're actually starting to use all the resources and you start to tax them, that's when shit starts to slow down. So there's this element of like, only in the most recent games that are coming out for these consoles are you ever actually getting games slowing down the system. Because I believe people were saying Marvel's Avengers were giving their PS4s problems, and I think Control was giving people some problems with their consoles. But again, this is where it's only years and years into the existence of these consoles do the developers actually start to make use of all their capacity. And it's like, now that the GPU processing is so far ahead of the game consoles, I had assumed that the game consoles were going to be DOA, but I discounted the idiocy of the game console buyers, or they're not the game console buyers, the game console fanboys that don't understand they can buy a gaming PC and get all the same stuff. And there's all these people who are still convinced by marketing and media influence that somehow they're like buying a PS5 is the smart thing to do, when we know definitively that the developers aren't going to use it all, and by the time the PS6 comes out, it's just going to be getting to a point where the developers are finally using it. So it's like, as someone who then can turn around and use my gaming computer to make things, to produce videos, to produce content, it just doesn't even make sense to buy a machine that's only dedicated to gaming. It's just such a waste in 2020. Like, I don't understand any, like, if you're a kid, okay, yeah, you don't understand why you shouldn't buy a PS5 or why your parents shouldn't buy you a PS5. So yeah, get the kid a PS5 or whatever if they did well in their grades and do their chores. Yeah, I get that. But an adult, a grown-ass adult that's earning their own fucking money, that's willing to just throw hundreds of dollars away towards a dedicated thing that can't do other things, those people are dragging down our economy, specifically those types of people. Because then industry leaders keep putting out shit that doesn't achieve full functionality because people keep paying for it. And that's where I'm like, on the one hand, I don't you don't want to try to dictate how people spend their money. But on the other hand, when they're throwing the money away and making their experience worse, the only thing you can do is call them fucking idiots. They're fucking stupid. If anybody's willing to pay more for less in experience, you're fucking dumb. And that's the only way to approach it. In that, yeah, I can't go take away their money. I can't go make them stop being idiots. I can just only call them idiots because that's what they are. And it's not the fact that they're buying the game system. It's the fact that in a time when you don't have to buy the game system to get the gaming experience, and in fact can get a better gaming experience by not buying that game system, the people that continue to go buy the fucking game console are idiots. And there's just no way around it. And that's kind of where I'm like, as you know, going into my 4th decade, getting close, there are a lot of things that I've witnessed people do over these last, tens of years that they continue to do. And that's where I'm like, it seems as if every year people's concepts of existence get reset or something. They just can't remember what happened previously.
Yeah.
And that's...
I think I mean, I know that there are people who are like, PlayStation for life, Xbox for life, and then when it comes down to it, it's because they don't want to learn the ergonomics of a different controller. And I think that some people don't realize that you can plug those controllers into a computer. Like, I use an Xbox controller on my computer. If there's a game that I learned on PlayStation like years and years ago, and had like extreme muscle memory for the controller, I might buy a PlayStation style controller to plug into my computer. But the controller I use the most is a flight stick, and that's pretty agnostic, I think. I mean, flight sticks are flight sticks at this point. There's kind of like a agreed upon design for the stick itself, and one for the throttle. There's an agreed upon button layout, and those decisions were decided over a decade ago at this point. Well over a decade ago. Holy crap, a lot of them like to emulate real planes, so some of those decisions were made 40 years ago.
And have not changed since.
Yeah. The number one controller for Flight Simulator, the new Flight Simulator, is based off of a Cessna, I believe. So, and that's an old plane. It's not like it has a bunch of buttons and touchscreens like an Airbus. It's got levers or switches, like physical switches that you would use. I know that there are a few like envisioned as spacecraft control interfaces, but really they're just a variation on a flight stick.
Yeah, because then, obviously, once something gets engineered to its pinnacle, then you can't really go too much farther.
Yeah.
So that's where it's like maybe we've got to the pinnacle of controller interfaces where anything more becomes diminishing returns.
Yeah. No, I think that's definitely it. I think that's the reason the keyboard has remained the way it is for so long. There are faster keyboard layouts in terms of touch typing if you are able to learn them. But those keyboards are really expensive, and then you end up having to travel around with a keyboard everywhere you go, because practically everyone else on Earth has, their culturally approved keyboard. We've got QWERTY, but there's also like AZERTY and Dvorak right-hand dominant, and there's a list of them, and they all have a lot of research behind them. And if you learn one of them first, you might have a 20-30% increase in typing speed. But people can touch type on a QWERTY keyboard, in the 80 to 100 word per minute range. I think that's fast enough.
Yeah, that's where I'm at. It's like, well, what do I need to do? 200? Like,
You
what?
really need to do that? Like, and really, I mean, the history of the keyboard is kind of funny because it comes from a mechanical typewriter where people were able to type faster back then. It's just the machine itself couldn't keep up. The mechanism itself would get bound up or locked up on itself. And so they had to create a typing system that was intrinsically slow so that binding wouldn't happen. And we don't have that problem anymore because we use membranes or sometimes mechanical mechanisms to actuate the key strike. But we still hold on to this old system. Maybe it's to prevent people from thinking too quickly.
Yeah, maybe, it's maybe if we had the capacity to think or to express faster, maybe we will think faster. Because then, yeah, if people can type at 200 words per minute, who's to say they can't do it, or 300 words per minute or something?
Yeah. If you get used to walking at a certain speed, you tend to walk at that speed.
I'm just trying to imagine, like, if somebody can type 300 words a minute, that's a page a fucking minute.
Yeah.
Over a minute. That's insane. There's no way, like, they would be rapping as fast as Twista on his fastest day.
Non-stop for pages.
Yeah. And that's where I'm like, at a certain point when you start to get to these speeds, like, say you're writing a 10-page paper, well, you're saying you're going to be done in like 9 minutes. But obviously nobody's writing like that many words continuously without thinking about it. But this is where, again, the upper limits of typing, like, don't really, once you start to get past them, then you have to then update your thinking, which doesn't really correspond. And once you try to start going that, seeing what it's like to be typing 300 words per minute, then you say, oh, well, once I get done with 300 words, I have to go look at what the material is that I need to do the next 300. So I can't just do 3,000 words continuously because I need to keep referencing what I'm trying to type. Even if somebody's creating this stuff, like, say somebody's writing Lord of the Rings, there's no way that you can just go 300 words per minute, even if you're creating the stuff, because then you still have to think about what you're creating. And so then that's where, again, the actual speed limit of the typewriter becomes our natural thought.
Yeah.
Which is, I think we're there.
God, what a strange pair of shackles. The tool that provides us with the productivity boost might also be the thing that prevents us from thinking at speeds that we're capable of thinking on.
Yeah, because I'd like to think that we don't have a single processing unit point in our brain, and that's kind of why we can process visual and audio at the same time and think about things while we're processing visual and audio. But in that parallel processing, or it's either parallel processing or rapid serialization, either one, that there is going to be an upper limit, I think, is something that is hard to even fathom, because then it's like, what does that feel like? How do I know if I'm thinking at the highest speed I can think? Can I think faster than that? Like, what if I hit that peak? How do I think? Does that mean I can't add one more thought in there? It's just such a weird speed limit.
Maybe it's an issue of clarity. Like, the faster someone's thought process occurs, the blurrier it becomes around the edges. And so there can really only be like a central point of focus. But when we think about big pictures, we can't really see all of the details. And so maybe by imposing some kind of physical limitation on expressing ideas, it allows us to get somewhere in between where we're able to see most of the picture with clarity. We still lose the image at the fringes, and we lose absolute finite detail at the center. Of course, this is a strange visual metaphor for thought, but I don't think that we. I think that there's definitely a parallel processing, like thought process involved, because we hear and we see and we think and we speak all at the same time. It's just not all of these things have, center stage at every moment.
I'm thinking about that kind of paradigm and the analysis that you've applied to typing or expressing thought in a particular way at a particular speed to martial arts practice and martial arts training. So there's a lot of philosophy and there are a lot of adages and pieces of advice that I think a lot of martial artists may be familiar with or have received about emptying the mind or not thinking too much or training to the point of a certain natural response. But I feel like there's also a level of strategy and comfort and relaxation in a state of continual change. And there's a certain aspect, there's a certain level of thought that is present, but it seems to be a goal to not get stuck on a particular thought and to be able to move from one concept to another or one shape to another in a fluid manner. And I think that there's some parallels to be drawn between that and being able to express ideas very, very quickly.
Yeah, because I think in the martial arts example, that's a great sidestep in that it would be pretty easy to see that the more one tries to increase the speed of something, the less accurate they become with that thing. But over time, they can start to train that speed to then be more accurate. But then that's also like, even then, every person has an upper physical limit that they're going to hit. But then in the presence of another influence that may be an outside, whether it's an enemy or a trainer, that can then push that person past that point for whatever reason, whether it be because of adrenaline or because of some sort of interaction that gives that person some sort of extra source of energy that's like a boost from the outside source. So it's like you can generate so much speed and velocity from internal force, but then somebody helps you somehow, then you can generate more. Like, you see it in the wrestling where someone may pick up their partner and then throw them on somebody else. And it's things like that where you're not necessarily looking at these examples as people surpassing their physical limitations, but in many cases, that's kind of what they're doing. It's like, if you can't jump 10 feet in the air, climb on somebody's shoulders. And it's like, there are all these other ways for a human to get around their limitations that when you only look internally, your choices are limited. But then once you start to factor in the external possibilities and external variations that can influence it, then you start to see these limitations changing and then being less restrictive, or it's the even the notion of the limitation changes once you get outside of your physical limitations. But again, this is where everybody's obviously different. So one person's limitation may be another person's lowest, the lowest that they can perform, the lowest level they can perform at.
Without
And,
falling asleep or something.
right. Yeah. I mean, like a hummingbird. A hummingbird, their lowest level of heartbeats and the lowest level of their speed is going to be some shit we can never even attain as humans, really.
Even when they sit still, like when they're not when they land on something and they're not flapping their wings, their heads twitch so fat. Well, to us they look like a twitch, but I'm sure that they're just moving smoothly and everything else around them is barely moving.
And then their hearts can get up to 1,260 beats per minute.
That's like unfathomably fast.
Yeah. Like if ours go past, 230, we're basically having a heart attack. And it's like,
it just shows the interesting physiological differences that various biological beings have in a state of relaxation. I feel like if a hummingbird was tense, then it wouldn't be able to fly as efficiently. It wouldn't be able to maneuver as efficiently. It looks like sharp movements to us because our eyes are trying to catch up with the movement, and we're trying to anticipate the movement of the hummingbird. But I think if we were, once we slow it down and we see hummingbirds in slow motion for our perspective or our capacity to perceive movement, then we see a very smooth chain of biological and physiological and kinesiological effects and movements that are compounded and sustained by a very ideally tuned mechanism. And it's hard to see. I think it's more difficult to see that sustained across human beings. There doesn't seem to be like a universally accepted, finely tuned kinesiological or physiological ideal across humans. And but then I think about martial arts like Tai Chi, and I think about Bagua, and I think about Xingyi, and these martial arts that rely on relaxation in order to achieve speed or alignment of one's own individual physiological structure in order to achieve stability and balance and rootedness. Then there seems to be a conceptual and philosophical alignment as well.
And I think, this is where you start to see different schools approach things in different ways, so that, obviously it would be very weird if there was a single ideal or single desired goal to be attained. Then with 8 billion people, it's going to start to look really homogenous. But that's kind of where, you get all these variations in the martial arts, because the different schools value different aspects of physicality or different aspects of movement or capacity to engage with another. So then all that variation becomes how people choose their preference for what they want to become, because then they start to look towards others, say, oh, these are the things I want to attain or surpass, and then they start to go on that trajectory.
You just reminded me of that image you shared with us earlier this week. It was the Lego Harris poll. What do you want to be when you grow up? Among ages 8 to 12, children polled in China said, for the vast majority, said astronaut. In the United Kingdom, children said vlogger or YouTuber, and in the United States, it was also vlogger or YouTuber. I just I think that we have to have some kind of really broad course correction in the way things are valued for that to actually work. I don't think that we can continue to glorify marketability the way that it has been as something to aspire to, in the same way that we should, you know, champion intellectual pursuit or academic pursuit, or just valuing, you know, the ability to comprehend literature at a higher level than whatever passes for graduating from high school.
This shows a cultural difference or disparity also.
Yeah.
Different management of expectations. I think that means that people are looking to get some sort of entree into the attention economy in order to sustain themselves in those two countries, as opposed to somebody trying to be involved in a scientific or exploratory career in order to add to the body of knowledge. I mean, both philosophies add to the body of knowledge. It's just like, what kind of knowledge is really being added, or is it just going to be more data that's trawled in order to spread misinformation or just opinions,
Or to sell beer.
or to sell beer or other dumbing items, things like that, distractions.
Well, and in that environment, then it becomes so much more difficult to find things that are going to be improving or help one build the self rather than distract. That, and I think that, you know, was evidenced by a lot of people, well, pretty much the entire world getting the chance to take a year and better themselves. And then, especially in America, immediately trying to move back into distraction mode and get away from the freedom to improve. I'm not surprised, but it's amazing and baffling how much Americans rejected the capacity to improve themselves for distraction. Everyone was not, they could not wait to get back out of their homes and get back into this distraction mode where everything is the rat race, but it's not actually doing anything. All of the movement to get the economy back open was just to get stuck in place. The very notion of the economy moving is just getting back to the pre-COVID distraction, sports, movies, television, theme parks, anything to get your mind out of the fact that you're wasting time not bettering yourself. That's immediately what America tried to go back to after having just a couple of months of introspective time. And obviously, the government did not help. They did not give enough money to extend that period for people. So many were forced back into a risky situation where they had to put their lives on the line to get paid, get underpaid and undervalued in the first place. Or I guess in this case, it's the second place because they're going back to it from when they were doing it before. So that's kind of where, again, you have a class of people who are prisoners to this system, and then they are forced to go work underpaid wages to appease the class of people who then want to be distracted from the rest of reality. And this is, again, America is really good at fabricating distractions, and that's kind of what our economy is based on now. So when we're talking about back to normal, when we're at, I mean, obviously everything is not 100% normal, but it's kind of close. Like, as far, like, there's people still dying from COVID and people still spreading COVID, but as far as the actual economy, like, it's kind of back to the place it was late 2018, early 2019, as far as things operating. And we're not going anywhere as a country. Like, Nvidia is acquiring ARM. How's that going to affect the United States? How is the United States technology going to benefit from that? There was just an article that came out about how Google was talking about the American innovation falling off, and how our country has just not kept up at all concerning technological advancement with the rest of the world. And this is where we have a bunch of old ass people who are just now getting to understand Facebook, just now getting to understand Twitter. These people don't understand technological progress, but they're the ones sitting on all the capital. They're the ones sitting in the offices, making all the decisions, and we're perpetually stuck in 1955. And that's kind of where, when I look at it as somebody who loves technology, but understands that obviously all technology is not neutral, all technology is not beneficial, I'm still going to be skeptical about new technology, but I'm also going to try to move society forward. These people aren't trying to move society forward, but we all are forced to coexist with them and treat them as if they have the same desire to move the country forward and not keep it stagnant. So that's kind of where I think we're at a point where we have to be realistic about our dialogue with this regressive Luddite group and not treat them as rational human beings, because they are not rational human beings in this case.
Yeah. You know, what was it, the Bob Woodward tapes, where Cheeto Mussolini comes out and says that he knew that it was airborne, he knew that it was more dangerous than the flu, and then goes and says the opposite. There hasn't been a huge backlash from that, which just reaffirms the whole, they just want to watch the libs cry.
Yep, there's no internal consistency on that whatsoever.
There's no dialogue with that either. If that's their goal, then it doesn't matter if they're wrong, it doesn't matter if they're right, it doesn't matter what it is, because all they have to do is get someone's blood to boil, and they're satisfied that they've accomplished their goal. I mean, what a pathetic goal. It's not even something to aspire to. It shouldn't be.
Well, so this is new. Apparently, Ohio State University is canceling their spring break for 2021 over coronavirus concerns.
Yeah.
So they're having 2 days off instead of an actual spring break, and they don't want students leaving and going on vacation. I'm so glad the American safari is coming to an end.
Oh my god.
Like, Americans have been taking their vile germs around the planet, going around killing animals and posing with them for fucking way too long, and finally...
Fuck you, Jimmy John. Straight up, fuck that guy.
Yeah.
Like, if people actually go into those places, they should be asking for, like, what is it, a beach club with tiger on it, because they that's what they're doing. They're enabling guys like that to go shoot animals that don't even want to be around humans. Fuck that guy. Fuck all those motherfuckers. I remember maybe it was like a year or so ago, uh, some asshole that likes to go and shoot lions. He got killed by a lion. Sucks for his family because they probably lost their breadwinner. But fuck that guy. He shouldn't be going out into the safari and shooting a lion.
Yeah, man.
Let that thing die on its own.
Yeah, like I'm I'm happy that there is some natural phenomena that's preventing Americans from traveling. As somebody who's traveled a lot for business and not for pleasure, I realized, like, when you're sitting on a plane and there's this element of like, what you're doing is polluting because the industry doesn't want to update how they operate. I've been flying on planes since I was a kid. There's no reason that the plane should still be polluting in the same way as it does, or as it did when I was a kid, yet it does. So there's all these things about what's happening now that are going to force change on all these other fronts that I'm hopeful that, because as society takes time to address these other elements, it's forced to the inefficient, unsustainable aspects of itself. And that's just like, I've tried to cut down on my meat eating because that's not sustainable. Shit like that, where it's like, everybody has an individual responsibility to keep the planet alive. That doesn't mean you have to exist in a shitty vacuum where you never experience anything that you ever liked. That's not what that means. It just means that you have to be aware about how your actions are going to impact the planet long term. And that's kind of where it's not too much to ask people to think about how their actions are going to impact Earth 10 years into the future. That's not too much to ask.
It's kind of amusing. The improvements we get to the airline industry come in the form of passenger tracking and route management and new software to help the plane fly by itself. But we're not getting these monumental leaps in efficiency that other industries are experiencing. Even jet fighter planes have more advanced engines now than they did 10 years ago. Sometimes it seems like these things are not about improving anything. It's just about making more money. That's where the real improvements come from. If the improvement doesn't make more money, then it's just not viable. And you'd think that fuel savings would be an improvement, but maybe it's because the airlines themselves, the airports, the terminals are already at capacity, and they can't really build more airports because there's not enough demand in certain regions. But they need to maintain the amount of fuel they consume to continue to prop up our petroleum industry. And so that's, like, I don't know, I can't remember what the cheapest Tesla is. I think it's like a $40,000 or $50,000 car. But that doesn't help somebody who needs, the $25,000 electric Kia. I'm pretty sure Kia is going to win the electric car war, or whatever Chinese car company manages to break the American market with their $20,000 electric car.
Yeah, again, that's kind of where, as somebody who's been wanting an electric car basically my entire life, because I've known about them, they've conceptually existed my entire life, but they've never really been viable for my demographic. We're finally getting to a point where car manufacturers can make them viable, but they're choosing not to until they are absolutely forced to. And it's the weirdest thing where, again, it's because it's all a bunch of old ass dudes, all a bunch of old ass like white haired dudes sitting in a fucking office, not listening to anybody but their own group. And that's where, again, everybody knows that's what the executive boardroom looks like. And that's why there's no fucking electric cars. I mean, obviously there are some, but again, the lack of electric cars is due to these old people who just don't want to let go of 1955. And that's again where I'm.
You know, I think it's going to be the Chinese, and here's why. You know that image you shared. The U.S. bans Huawei from using U.S. chip technology in Google OS. Huawei responds to you by designing their own chips, and then they create their own OS. And lo and behold, they're the number one in world sales. And then people in the United States, wait, that's not how you're supposed to play this game, right? Yeah. Well, it occurs to me that that same thing is going to happen with China if they leapfrog all of America's desire for internal combustion engines and big ass gas guzzling vehicles for in favor of electric vehicles, and they're already doing it because they've got more electric car companies that are functioning and turning out electric cars than America does. I think GM bought like the Tesla or Nikola truck company, the electric truck company. They bought it so they could access intellectual property, and now that they've got their information, they're going to start pulling out. They're going to slowly divest and allow a company that was, putting a lot of resources into innovation and new invention. They're going to let them flounder now because that's actually the capitalist way.
Yeah, I think you're spot on too with that. In that, I don't know what the Chinese government thinks, obviously, but there does seem to be more understanding that the Chinese government cannot exist if the planet doesn't fucking exist.
Yep.
So, on the one hand, yeah, they're communist China. They have human rights violations. But they kind of seem to understand that if the planet dies, they fucking die too. So whatever they've done in the past does not negate the possibility that they understand climate change. And that's kind of where, for all of the negative things the Chinese government has ever done, they are effectively ahead of us on climate change and how they're treating their industry and how they're treating their investments and how they're treating renewable resources compared to America. So, on the one hand, as an American, it's scary to me that my government and my country are regressive and not moving forward. But on the other hand, as a global citizen, I'm like, oh, well, China's doing some shit that we're not doing. I guess we're going to be stuck here in 1955 for a while. But at least the fucking rest of the world can move forward.
Yeah.
So on the one hand, while our country sucks, the rest of the world is kind of, it's not that they're okay. They're moving on without us.
Man, America just got put in the corner with a fucking dunce cap.
Basically.
I mean, even Canada reported no new cases of COVID. Our neighbors to the north, they found they're at a stable point numbers wise. They're literally right above, like directly north of us. Why the hell? Obviously they did something right that we didn't do. They shut down their borders and they didn't make exceptions, and they had testing, and they have a smaller population than we do, and they're less density. But still, we're supposed to be able to take like lessons from our neighbors, things to do, things not to do. We can't lead the way if we're always wearing the dunce cap.
I mean, yeah, and Mexico, as our other neighbor, 70,000 deaths, that's less than half.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. I've got that COVID thing. I've got a folder full of COVID information links. Yeah, Mexico's number 7 in total cases, but yesterday they only had 5,000 or 6,000 new cases. Two days ago they had 5,000 new cases, 70,000 total deaths. They only had 554 new deaths. The United States had twice that number. 1,000 new deaths 2 days ago, only 700 yesterday. As of this moment, there are 226.
6.5 million cases.
6.7 according to worldmeters.info.
Damn, that's 200,000 more.
Yeah. Oh. We're almost at 200,000 deaths according to world meters. Let's see. Yesterday, the deaths came from Texas, and then Florida, and then California, Georgia, Tennessee, Arizona, North Carolina, Illinois, Alabama. Indiana was in the top 10 yesterday with 17 deaths. Indiana's got 104,000 total cases.
Did see something about Indiana possibly slowing down though.
Oh, that was yesterday, and today Indiana is number 7 in total cases with 1,200. So we got more cases today than yesterday. I think Labor Day that was recently? Yeah, Labor Day. I think we're going to start seeing the Labor Day numbers. So all that stuff's going to rise with all of these people just going out because they're so bored. I'm really glad that I've got a hobby that allows me to be entertained while I'm at home without having to feel some weird desire to go stand around a bunch of people and sweat.
Yeah, that's so weird, right? I mean, really look at what public gatherings are. It's just being around other people's sweaty, disgusting, unwashed bodies.
Breathing on each other.
So you can hear other people yell, smell other people's breath. Because as far as
you gotta, and most of the time you have to pay for that experience.
Right. Well, I was about to say we had a virtual Muay Thai seminar a few weeks ago. There was over 50 attendees. Now, I don't know if anybody's ever trained Muay Thai before. And when you're doing it in real life, there's a lot of things that are not necessarily good. Number one, people fucking stink. People really fucking stink. And sometimes people don't wash their shit. So then they're wearing the same clothes every time. They're like, I'm doing Muay Thai class. I'm going to wear my Muay Thai shorts and shirt. But they don't wash that shit. So then you have to go to these classes with people who haven't washed their fucking shit in months or brushed their teeth before they came to class. You have to clinch up with these people. Some of them might have staph infections. Then you get staph fucking.
Isn't that how ringworm gets transmitted with wrestlers in high school?
Yeah, that's exactly how fucking ringworm gets transmitted. That's exactly why I don't want to fucking be going to this shit. And that's why I'm like, now we can do this shit virtually. I've done a virtual martial arts class. That shit is fucking possible. That shit is not only possible, I feel like it was a better experience than the physical classes because I didn't have to worry about smelling somebody's dirty ass fucking armpits. And that's why, again, there's so much stuff about the actual being in a room with a bunch of other people. That's when I'm like, man, that shit is for the birds and for dirty ass people, as far as I'm concerned. Like,
when we were all at IU, I remember many times going to meet somebody after their martial arts club and just smelling a room full of, equipment and gis, like things that made me think, like, this is way more intense than I remember the high school locker room being. And it's because it's men, it's not teenagers. It's like grown men engaging in that level of activity, and some of them smoke, and some of them drink, and some of them eat nothing but, hamburgers.
And that shit comes through your pores. If you eat meats and you sweat, that shit comes through your pores.
Yeah.
Ooh. And then you got to roll with that person. Well, that's just like, I remember when we did our seminar, our adjunct was like, who's smoking weed? Who's been smoking weed? and nobody raised their hand. He comes over to me and he's like, "You smell like weed. You been smoking today?" I'm like, "No, sir." He's like, "Well, it's coming out of your pores." Shit. Okay, then. But that's where, like, yeah, I wasn't thinking, like, oh, I didn't smoke weed that day. I'm not thinking about that. Then here comes, "You smell like weed." And that's where I'm like, well, if he doesn't like weed, that's going to make his experience suck. So then I have to make sure I'm not going in there smelling like weed next time. So I'm not distracting people or making them deal with this smell that they don't want to fucking smell.
I remember one time I ate a cookie, and I did on a Sunday, and then Monday at work I had to use the restroom, and I dropped the deuce, and I realized I need to go home and finish the day at home because everything in there smelled like grass. It was messed up. Thank you for that, by the way. That was a really good cookie. There are some things that I do miss. There are some face-to-face interactions that I, genuinely enjoyed, pre-COVID. But as we've been exploring for the duration of lockdown and all through now, up to this point, we've been doing this talk show over the internet. We're in 3 different locations. Daniel's in a different state. We've had guests from all over the country. We had a guest from Germany. I think it's possible to have the kind of interactions that, they're not necessarily one-to-one, but they're just as enriching. They're just as meaningful. It's just a matter of how much people actually put into them, or if it's obviously not as casual because you have to schedule a time to do these kinds of things. But in a lot of ways, that kind of makes things better. It's not just like, "Hey, what are you doing? I'm coming over," which is fine, but it was fine. But it's actually kind of cool now. It's like you got to plan things. It requires a little bit of thought, some logistics, some coordination. I really think that something like an improved interactive environment uh, is definitely part of the equation. And I think that, to get back to ARM's acquisition, or the ARM acquisition by NVIDIA, like that'll only, well, it might not, but that has the potential to improve a lot of things interaction-wise.
Oh yeah, most definitely. As long as Facebook is not the one mediating it like they were with the Oculus VR space, I think there's a lot of room for creating these interactive spaces that are then more reactive and interactive. Because it's like, if it gets to a point where people can then meet up in virtual coffee shops, or if we go to a virtual space that has a coffee shop feel, and I'm making my coffee at home, and there's people's avatars around that look real enough. If I really am that concerned with being surrounded by people, there's going to be a point where it's going to be able to trick your body into thinking you're surrounded by people. So at that point, like, say you even get the smell effect where they
you buy a special module and you pay for an additional service to modulate an olfactory output device.
Exactly, because they do that shit with the 4D movies. Yeah. So the tire burns, you smell rubber, and that's kind of where, at a certain point, there's going to, like, they have these olfactory stimulation machines that then put out scents to. They put out combinations of scents that are then meant to evoke certain responses of smelling a certain thing. So once that becomes cheap enough, then that will be part of the system. So then you're watching a movie and an explosion happens and you smell the gunpowder. And it's like, well, once it's that real, maybe you realize you don't want it to be that real.
Yeah.
And then pull it back. And this is kind of where
every sword and sandals movie, every Civil War movie, every dystopian bloody murder movie, like, all that shit's gonna smell so fucking foul Nobody's going to want to watch that. Nobody's going to want to smell it. And
Downton is gonna smell like shit. Even those people walking around looking Victorian, guess what? They smelled like ass.
ugh, ass and too much perfume and collagen.
Now we'll be able to know. And that's
That was back in the days when they would like dump garbage out the window
Yeah.
chamber.
onto the street.
Oh.
Like just like buckets of like excrement just out the window.
It's like a litter box, basically.
Yeah, litter box, basically.
I was talking to someone earlier this week about how like public parks are literally just animal toilets.
Yeah. They are.
People go out there, do their burpees and cartwheels. I see public parks as art installations.
Sometimes. Sometimes they are, and sometimes they're not. Like when parks that have playgrounds that aren't given the attention that they need, that start to deteriorate. Those are definitely. I mean, if once they deteriorate to a point that nobody wants to use any of the facilities, then it's just a pile of trash. It's a trash yard that hasn't started receiving donations. And like they're in Bloomington there are several public parks that have like restrooms, and there's always some really bullshit tag, like someone writes some nonsense word, or they don't even make an attempt to make it look interesting. They'll just write just something, and it's not even readily identifiable as like actual graffiti. It's just a bunch of crap on a wall, or they scrape paint off with a knife, or all they have is a pencil, and so they just grind down the tip of a pencil on something and kind of make something out, but that's a bleak picture. That's like the worst case scenario. There are a lot of parks that are pretty fucking nice though. Like I've seen some parks that have playgrounds that are like, man, I wish we'd had this stuff when I was a kid. And then I run up and like slide down the slide because the part of me that still is a kid wants to go down that 3-story corkscrew, because that's pretty dope.
Yeah, I mean, I remember playgrounds when we were kids were basically danger zones. But now,
Those metal slides that get like boiling hot.
yeah, oh god, yeah, I'm
It's
doing
slippery.
shocked.
Oh
Yeah, you just get electric shocks or splinters off of all that.
Or you stick to the fucking thing and you get a horrible road rash on your leg.
Or they were tall enough that if you fell off one, you're probably breaking something, like legitimately.
They don't have like any guardrails. It's basically just like a flat piece of sheet metal.
Guardrails. Ours had rocks underneath it. If you fell into fucking rocks.
Or just like concrete.
Yeah, it's like survival of the fittest.
If you can make it up, you got to make it down.
I remember some of those games we played on the playground. Some of it was basically one person getting chased by everyone, or one person chasing everyone, and so everyone was just running almost free for all. I remember seeing people falling on slides and smacking their faces into the slide and getting shot off in a big streak of blood. I remember seeing that kind of stuff.
Very un-PC name for that game.
What? Chase somebody around relentlessly?
There's a specific name for it. I don't even want to say it.
Oh yeah, I'm not even. I don't even want to go there.
Yeah. Anybody can figure it out, but again, there's like times where like, oh, that was a game? Holy shit! What the fuck was wrong with people?
Yeah, it's never fun being the person who's being chased. It's just not fun. But what was fun was once they started including those zipline roller car things, and then I noticed that people would actually get in line and wait for their turn to slide to one end and then slide to the other end, or slide back. And then when the monkey bars started becoming more complicated, and having like multiple levels, that stuff was kind of cool because I guess they're more like a cage. But even then, those things, like, either parents let their kids go on them or they didn't, and the ones who did, like, those kids clearly had, some kind of physical intelligence that gave them the wherewithal to climb on those things.
Remember when I was like either first grade or kindergarten, like I would climb up on top of the monkey bars and like walk on top of them, like a bridge.
I was that kid too. I didn't want to just use the thing to get from point A to point B. I would go up and hang out on top of things. I got in trouble a lot. I'm not really in trouble. Many times I remember a teacher saying, "Come on down, Teen. You don't need to be up there." It's like, then I would start getting down the way I got up, and they're like, "Oh, slow down." No, you don't understand. This is how you get up and down this thing.
I remember taking a tumble, a couple of tumbles.
I mean, I fell out of trees.
Surprised I didn't break anything, but
Yeah.
glad I didn't.
I've fallen out of trees. I've never gotten seriously injured doing it, fortunately. But I remember a few times landing on my back and getting the wind knocked out of me and just thinking, like, okay, I'm just going to lay here for a little bit.
Yeah, it knocked the wind right out of me. I was upset.
Well, it's amazing how pliable kids' bones are, where it's like, I know there's plenty of times where I fell out of shit that should have broken my back or some shit.
Yeah, I mean, when you're a little kid, you're made out of rubber practically.
Basically. Yeah, start running around. There's always a second before, like, when a kid gets injured where you're like, are they going to cry? Are they going to cry? And it's like, if they don't cry, then they just go immediately back to what they're going to do. And it's like...
Yep. Sometimes that's the way it is,
Exceptional Radio.
Exceptional Randos show is produced live in Sunroom Studios' Base Capsule and in partnership with KLST 103.5, RadioCallisti.org. Remember to catch our Exceptional Randos live stream on YouTube every Sunday between 2 and 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And if you have a story, idea, or question that you would like to share, we want to hear from you. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was random. Exceptional Radio.